Cardinal Richelieu writes about universal education. A body which had eyes all over it would be monstrous, and in like fashion so would be a state if all its subjects were learned. One would find little obedience and an excess of pride and presumption. The commerce of letters would drive out that of goods, from which the wealth of the state is derived. It would ruin agriculture, the true nourishment of the people, and in time would dry up the source of the soldiery, whose ranks flow more from the credulities of ignorance than from the refinements of knowledge. It would indeed fill France with quibbles more suited to the ruination of good families and the upsetting of public order than to doing any good for the country. If learning were profaned by extending it to all kinds of people, one would see far more men capable of raising doubts than of resolving them, and many would be better able to oppose the truth than to defend it. It is for this reason that statesmen in a well-run country would wish to have as teachers more masters of mechanic arts than of liberal arts." End quote. A doubt can be raised whether Cardinal Richelieu isn't advocating a monstrous crime here by wishing to plunge people into ignorance and deny them the truth. "The truth shall make you free," our Lord teaches. Does Richelieu teach otherwise? If he means it in an absolute sense, if he means that we should deny true, well-ordered knowledge and solid intellectual formation to anyone, then let me be the first to condemn him. But it seems to me that that is not how we should understand him. Rather, he means that education, when made universal, becomes diluted. Richelieu writes, "If learning were profaned by extending it to all kinds of people, one would see far more men capable of raising doubts than of resolving them. If all men received true intellectual formation, then they would be equally capable of resolving doubts rather than simply raising them." It seems to me that the Cardinal describes precisely the modern world. We have many men who received an education, even at a university, but lack true formation. Richelieu is stating that the proliferation of false learning is not an accident, but an essential and necessary flaw of attempting to extend education too much. At another point he writes, "Because a knowledge of letters is entirely indispensable to a country, it is certain that they should not be indiscriminately taught to everyone." Thus, he means that it is better to have in a country few men who are educated, but who are educated to the highest standard, rather than have many who are educated poorly. As he also makes clear, those educated in practical matters, masters of mechanic arts, should outnumber abstract thinkers. But those who lack education themselves should not be abandoned to ignorance, but guided by those who possess it. As Pope Leo XIII writes, For he who created and governs all things has, in his wise providence, appointed that the things which are lowest should attain their ends by those which are intermediate, and those again by the highest. That Richelieu is correct to prefer few specialized, learned men to half-educated masses is, I think, uncontroversial. But is he correct to believe that universal education must produce masses of pseudo-intellectuals? I certainly agree with him. Allow me to present a few arguments. Firstly, we know that men do not all possess equal intellectual capabilities. It necessarily follows that not all can be educated to the highest standard. Here some might object that some learning is better than no learning. Not so. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. An ignorant man is aware of his own ignorance and naturally defers to those who seem to know better. A man with a little superficial learning is convinced that he is an expert. We see this every day. Frederick Bastiat, for example, perfectly points out that to an uneducated man, everything seems to be an act of God. He is naturally religious. We might say, if left alone, he is perhaps a little superstitious. But when he begins to study science, he sees that what he at first saw as the acts of God have natural causes, and this kills in him the natural religious inclination. Bastiat points out that this is of course a very shallow understanding of science, for when we study it more carefully, we, instead of seeing the agency of God diminish, we rather see it become even more magnificent when we see all the harmonies and wonderful mechanisms by which God works. Thus, we should always strive that those who are educated deeply, that they see the glory of the Creator in the mechanisms he creates, instead of merely seeing natural causes as a replacement for faith. Another point is that we also know that when you teach a group, you need to lower the standard to fit the weakest students. Making education more egalitarian must lower the standard. This is the natural consequence of no child or no man left behind. Another concern is that liberal arts used to be practiced by men who had independent income. That is what made them liberal, as opposed to servile. They were not practiced for money. They were not practiced to serve other men, but their object was the truth. That is what they were made to serve. When they are subsidized and profaned, as Cardinal Richelieu says, they become ordinary jobs. Their practitioners must support themselves by producing pointless research and dubious theories. Truth is definite, and difficult to achieve. Professional philosophers and theologians, or worse yet, professional experts in gender studies, cannot make a living by limiting themselves to what is true. They become ideologues and demagogues, trying to satisfy their customers. Liberal arts, if they are to retain their noble character, need to remain the domain of those who have different means of income. A natural order has to be restored. Governments must stop subsidizing universities, or should we say indoctrination camps, and withdraw completely from the matters of education. Children ought to be educated privately or by religious organizations according to their natural abilities and the needs of their vocation, that is, the needs of their parents or their future employers. This way, mechanical arts will predominate as Cardinal Richelieu wished. Only those who have the leisure and the means to commit to a solid intellectual formation ought to pursue more abstract matters. Study of literature, art, culture, philosophy, or theology should never become easy and popular ways to get a diploma. But do not think I wish to artificially restrict learning to the few ultra-wealthy. Just as I do not wish to artificially expand it, I don't want to restrict it. I would like the learned class expanded as much as possible, provided that its expansion comes about naturally and without dilution and lowering of standards. I, however, recognize, with Cardinal Richelieu, that class is of necessity, of nature, always rather small and specialized. A teacher of mine once told me a story of her friend's grandfather. He was a farmer. All day he would tend to his pigs and cows, and in the evening he'd retire to his small house and sit in front of the fireplace and study Plato in the original Greek. I don't know where and in what circumstances he acquired the skill to do so. But extending knowledge to him is not a profanation. On the contrary, he ought to be exalted. He ought to be a local authority guiding others. Learning is profaned when young men and women who lack his capabilities are given an illusion of learning by receiving diplomas they did not truly earn.